exploring minds through insightful conversation. This is the Ian Scotto Podcast.
Scotto here with the first ever Ian Scotto podcast. I'm recording this in New York City right now, and I'm really excited to be doing this. I was going to say long time in the making. For a long time, I've wanted to do a show, but the idea of the podcast kind of came out of nowhere. I've been trying to make my way in radio for a long time. My journey in radio kind of started in 2005, I guess you could say, where I started with a training class at WRHU while I was going to Hofstra University. That led to an internship at Fangoria, which was on Sirius, and led to working at Sirius. But I've wanted to, be on air for a while now and have my own show going on. And you kind of wait around waiting for something to happen. And you listen to other people do interviews. And at least for me, I always feel like a lot of the time, it might sound cocky, but I feel like I could do such a better interview than this person. And it's just one of those things where you give yourself your own opportunities. And being that I have the access to studios like this and a lot of great guests who I've met along the years and people I've found intriguing and that I've wanted to interview, it kind of came to me, why don't I just do this show? I was told many times you should do a podcast, and, I guess you kind of get lazy and you wait around for someone to sign you. And I shouldn't say lazy, because it was like I was sending out demo after demo to make something happen, but I wasn't doing a show on my own, which I've wanted to do forever. So here it is. I'm finally doing it. This is the Ian Scotto podcast, and what we're basically going to be doing is spotlighting different people each week that I find interesting from all different fields. So the other week, I did a little teaser that you guys may have heard, and my friend Raphael here, who's hanging out with me in the studio, is shooting pictures because I wanted to get pictures done. And I'm gonna sound like a total woman here, but I was not happy with before you even came in, I was like, I don't like the way I look at all today. And I wasn't totally happy with the pictures. So you're back here to do the pictures with me. Do I sound ridiculous that
Man. You're just a perfectionist, that's all.
You could tell, because it takes a while for me to, do what I want to do. But once I get in the groove of something and I'm happy with it, we set it off. So Raph, actually, I've worked with, who I've known since WRH. Well, you weren't at WRH.
I wasn't. I was just participating, doing production here and there for the station, but I wasn't really a part of it. But
how come you didn't do a radio show?
Man, between commuting and, participating in other activities on campus, I just couldn't, find the time for it.
But you ended up doing so much in radio. I mean, you did Goom. You were saying.
I did Goom radio. I was interning at Hot 97. I was in the production department. So, I'm pretty, up in radio for the most part. It's a passion of mine.
And you're a beast on imaging.
I love imaging, man. I don't know what it is about it, but I got bit by that bug, in my sophomore year of college.
Yeah.
So.
And you're just, I could tell, you're a dude who likes to do all different things, whether it's photography and, photoshopping stuff and imaging for radio. So you're kind of a guy who, I didn't even hang out with you that much in college, but we've kind of formed a bond together when we want to work on stuff. I'll hit you up. Hey, can you take some pictures? And
I'm always down for the cause, man.
Which I appreciate, man.
Yeah.
Raph is not a guy who's well, you're gonna have to pay me some crazy amount of money to do this, even though you could, because you're a guy who shoots video. You do many things, and you and I were both working on music for a while, but I'm kind of taking a step back from that, doing this, and you.
So am I.
So what's the main thing that you're working on outside of radio right now at Clear Channel?
Right now, I'm just getting involved in anything that's creative. Whether it be photography or audio production. Just right now, I'm waiting to see how things pan out and just get involved as much as possible, meeting different people, saying, hey, you do this, I do this. Hey, let's, link up and, make something happen.
And it's funny, the way I got to know Raphael was we had these groups in this guy Mario Murillo's class who was very like NPR. It was very not my type of radio, but he would have us do these projects. And I remember I think like my group kind of sucked. Like I love those guys, but we were terrible. And you were in a group with Saul Arbello, Chris Morales, and was it you and that's it?
It was me and I think Victor Popoli. You remember him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, and you guys would kill it every time, and it was partially because you're imaging, but I could also tell you would purposely pick things that were like, what is this guy gonna like? Mario, you know, but he always loved the top. You guys always had a strategy, and always
that's a way to look at it. Yeah.
So we have Brandon Webb with us on the line, who I've known actually working with Andrew Wilkow, and I figured he was just a natural choice to bring on for the first interview. You were on SOFREP.com. Former Navy SEAL and Navy SEAL sniper instructor. What else? What am I missing there? Author of the Red Circle, too.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm a New York Times best-selling author now, twice over.
Yes.
I did it with the Red Circle, and then at Benghazi, the definitive report, which I wrote with Jack Murphy recently, was also hit number 9 on the New York Times list.
That's awesome, man. And what are you up to right now? When I was getting you on the line, you were telling me that, you're always all over the place.
I know. I think just growing up traveling and then being in the military and the SEALs, I just kind of, you get used to traveling all over the place. And kind of home is where the heart is. But I was up in Lake Tahoe on the Nevada side, and I just had my kids up for the last week. We were doing some skiing. I've got them all trained up. They're still pretty young. They're 6, 9, and 11. But wow, they're all over it.
Traveling between as much as you do, though, you know, with the whole relationship and your kids, it's got to be a hard thing to juggle.
Yeah, no, it is hard at times, but you know, I have a good relationship with my ex-wife, and I see the kids on most of the major holidays. And sometimes I take them with me on trips. I think even last time I was in studio with you guys, I had my daughter with me.
Sure.
On Wilkow's show. So, I'm able to bring them and share some pretty cool experiences with the kids, which is important, I think.
Definitely. So the one thing that I've never really gotten a chance to hear you talk about anywhere, and I think that I've wondered and other people have, and I'm sure is explained to some extent in your book, which I still need to read, is what makes someone join the Navy SEALs? Like I've had friends growing up who wanted to join the Army, join the Navy, and you know, when they were like 6 and they ended up doing it. But to join the Navy SEALs, it's like not only are you putting your life on the line for the country, but you're probably, you're definitely going to be tortured in the process, and you're going to go through some of the toughest things that any human could do. What drives you to do that? And did you want to do it as a kid, or is it something that as you got older you decided to do?
Well, I actually, as a kid, I always wanted to fly airplanes, and I'm a pilot today. I actually, ironically, later in my SEAL career, they let me have the time off to go become a pilot. But as a kid, I wanted to be a pilot, and I think what kind of pushes guys into the different branches of the military, whether it's Army Rangers or Army Green Beret, Air Force, Spec Ops, or the SEALs, is kind of their life experiences, and if they've had any of the mentors and as they're growing up, kind of, nudge them into that. And, whether, and books have a lot to do with it. I think that the SEALs have probably had an unfair share of the spotlight in the media lately.
Sure. I mean, with Bin Laden.
Yeah. You have the Bin Laden raid, but even up before that, you have Fowler, and it's not to get off topic, but it's something that the SEAL community is struggling with right now. They've kind of created this marketing team that has spun out of their control, and they're looking to get back in the shadows again, because it's, and then all of a sudden, people are expecting the housewives of SEAL Team 6 to come out on
yeah.
So it's just got a little too much. But, in the past, guys have always got out and written books, and I think that in itself is sharing those stories. Young kids, they read them and they learn about these different units, and like my friend Jack Murphy, who helps me run softrap.com. He read those old Vietnam books with these crazy Army Vietnam Rangers, and that's what kind of pushed him into the Army. But to answer your question, I had a pretty unorthodox childhood. I spent, after being born in Canada.
I didn't even know you were born in Canada.
Yeah, no, I was born in British Columbia. My father's Canadian, and my mother's a U.S. citizen. So I have dual citizenship. But I grew up in Canada the first 9 years of my life playing ice hockey and skiing, and then did a 180 as my parents moved my sister and I to California. And one of their dreams was to sail the world on a sailboat. So we actually bought a 50-foot catch, and they moved my sister and I on the boat. We lived on the boat for 10 years while my parents kind of saved up and prepared to take this big cruise. And we did smaller trips to Mexico and around the California islands before we took our big trip when I was about to turn 16. But growing up on the boat and being in the water, I ended up being really fortunate in getting my first real job as kind of I don't even want to say, I didn't start as a deckhand. I was lower on the totem pole than that, but
okay.
I worked on this scuba diving boat out of Ventura Harbor, and the boat was a phenomenal experience for me as a young kid, a 12-year-old kid growing up on this recreational charter boat. We take divers out to the islands, and the boat was a blast. We had a hot tub on the boat. It was a fun job, and
sure,
it gave me the opportunity to learn how to scuba dive at 12 years old. I had one of the captains teach me and certify me to dive, and by the time I was 15, I probably had close to 1,000 dives under my belt and was free diving and hunting and grabbing, shooting fish and grabbing lobster, and was just a maniac in the water. And I had a couple guys from the SEAL teams
that you met before you joined, that you met before you even considered joining.
Exactly. What happened, to make a long story longer, was so I was working on this boat, going to school, living on our boat with my family in the harbor, which was a great experience. Back when I was, in that period of my life, when you go to school, like in California, they're like, oh, living on a sailboat is kind of like living in a trailer park, I can imagine.
I'm sure.
People just aren't, they're like, huh, you're the boat kid? What's going on there? So, but it was a great life. Before school, I had good friends. I had just a great job on the dive boat. I got paid in tips to start, and then started making an hourly wage. But I was making, I had way more money than any of my friends in high school. Bought all my own dive equipment. But what happened was my parents were finally ready to take this big sailing trip. We were going to sail to Australia and then kind of see where we were at from there. And I was at a point in my life where I was turned 16, and I had a great job, a great life. I didn't want to go anywhere. I wanted to learn how to drive and chase girls. Things started to really get difficult. My dad and I, when I got to Acapulco, we were just really getting on each other's nerves and arguing about seamanship and all sorts of stuff. And I think just by the nature of me being about to turn 16 with a chip on my shoulder, and how fathers and sons, I don't think it's not strange for fathers and sons to kind of have that rub.
Of course, I think that's just part of growing up, no matter who you are.
Yeah. The interesting thing was, so we left from Acapulco and went across to the Marquesas Islands, which is the beginning of the South Pacific. It took us 30 days to sail there, and it just started getting worse and worse between him and I. And I'm from the Marquesas Islands. We went from it's a big island chain, but we went to Nuka Hiva, Hiva Oa, to the French Tuamotus, which are these small atolls, and eventually we hit Tahiti, which is part of the Society Islands. And my dad kind of had to come to Jesus with me and was like, look, it's time for you to get off the boat. Like, you're obviously very independent. You finished your school year, your junior year already on independent studies. Because we almost came to blows. I mean, my mom was crying, and so I left home at 16 in the South Pacific and found a boat that needed crew to sail back to Hawaii, and got on this catamaran named Shiloh and sailed back.
So this wasn't like the type of thing where, like, as a 5-year-old kid, you know, my dream is to be a Navy SEAL.
No, it wasn't. It was because my dream was to always fly, and then of course, you know, the Top Gun came out, and I'm like, oh, I want to fly jet.
Sure, but what do you have to do to prepare yourself? Because the thing is, I think you've told me that by the time you joined the SEALs, they didn't do the whole waterboarding thing. That was over with. But you still go through what is basically torture to become a Navy SEAL. How do you prepare yourself for that?
Well, the waterboarding is not something they do in SEAL training. It's more of the survival school that you get after the fact. They put you through like a POW experience. So
did you go through that or not?
Yeah, no, I mean, just about everyone does. The thing is, the thing about SEAL training, it's such a small community to begin with. I mean, there's just under 2,000 active duty SEALs in the military at any one time, and compare that to the Army, they've got close to 20,000 active duty personnel in the Special Operations Forces. So and now when you look at the training, you know, there's all sorts of different units in all branches of the military. You've got the Air Force, and they have now one school to put their spec ops guys through as far as the selection process. And really what, you know, the selection process does is weed out people that really don't want to be there or are going to have a propensity to quit when the going gets tough. And, you know, there's all sorts of different schools. Like I was getting at, the Air Force has its own for their pararescue or combat rescue personnel, their combat controllers, which are these essentially air traffic controllers who are trained to talk from the ground to aircraft, set up these hasty landing fields in the middle of Afghanistan, stuff like that. You have the Marine Corps Special Operations or Force Reconnaissance. The Army has the Rangers, the Special Forces, 2 different selection processes. Then you have the Navy SEALs. And when you put them all down on paper and say, okay, if I want to be a Ranger or I want to be an Air Force combat controller, what's that selection process or school like? And the SEALs, it's just a much longer, much arduous, probably in the U.S. military, one of probably the toughest selection processes, because it's almost 7 months, and that's 7 months of getting your teeth kicked in.
And it's 7 months where you really don't have any interaction with the outside world, right?
You do have interaction with the outside world. The thing is, it's just a grueling 7-month experience that doesn't lighten up until the day you get out of there. And it's kind of a lifestyle that you adjust to, and only gets harder when you finish SEAL training. And I'll explain it real quick. You've got to become a full-fledged Navy SEAL takes about 2 years. Okay, so you go to the Navy. If you go straight through now, which you can, you join the Navy, you go to boot camp, you go to BUDS, which is basic underwater demolition SEAL training. BUDS is divided up into 3 phases. You have the first phase, which is like the physical, mental conditioning phase. which is mainly forced at focused on making your life as most miserable as possible. And a part of that is Hell Week, which is the last part of first phase, where they keep you up for 5.5 days straight.
Wow.
Literally, you get probably about 40 minutes worth of sleep, and I would prefer to skip that, because it's designed to put you into deep REM sleep, wake you up, and see who's still game. Because
sure.
Believe me, when you get woken up, you're completely disoriented.
So is that one of those points where a lot of people start quitting? A lot of people start saying, this isn't for me?
Yeah, I'd say most of the quitters come in first phase, especially in Hell Week, because Hell Week starts off, and you're thinking to yourself, holy shit, I've got to stay up for 5.5 days of this, and the first 12 hours will be, okay, we're going to do a 4-mile timed run, and it's like midnight. We finish that, and they're like, you know what, we're going to do another one of those.
Wow.
You guys didn't. And then we're going to do a 2-mile ocean swim.
Is there one exercise, like, in particular, though, that you could pinpoint as, like, this was the toughest part of actually joining this elite group?
I mean, the toughest part is focusing mentally. And what I think probably the toughest part about the SEALs in particular is it's the cold water, because that's probably the biggest complaint, is they put you in the Pacific Ocean, and they have the charts. You don't realize the science behind it until you're later in the SEAL career, when I'm looking at, as an instructor myself, going, oh, they're like tracking this to the second. But they have a chart. They know how cold the water is and how long they could put you in, and they're going to put you in there until you get to the point of hypothermia, and then they're going to yank you out, and they're going to put you back in. And so what it does is really, they want to know without a shadow of doubt that you are committed to the program. And when the going gets tough, you're like, screw it, let's bring it on. They don't want some guy that's going to be like, oh man, I can't do this. And you really, one thing you can't do, and what I've learned, probably one of my biggest lessons, is being a SEAL, you never know what's inside a person. Because Ian, dude, I mean, you're a skinny guy. I see guys like you, and they're some of the toughest guys I know that are SEALs. And out in public, people will go, oh,
this
no
guy's
way.
a SEAL?
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, I've guys as skinny and a foot shorter than you that have made it, and they're the toughest bastards I know. And because they just have it inside of them to carry on. And so that's when I look at these Adonis, I remember this one guy in particular, because I was in pre-training with this guy in Great Lakes, and he was this, had the movie star good looks, 6 foot tall blonde guy, brushing the chicks off him at the bar. And the instructors liked him because he just had the look about him. He looked like what you would think a SEAL would look like. And that guy was the biggest pussy when we started buds, and he quit within the first couple weeks. And
wow.
It wasn't because he couldn't do things physically. He would always finish.
It's about mental toughness, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's not always physical capability, I think, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's all mental. It's
sure.
Most of special operations training is designed for a person of average physical ability to make it through. What people don't understand is that our bodies can do so much more than we think, because the normal to a normal person, you learn to push yourself to such extremes. You're like, man, I really can do this and stay up for over a week straight.
Wow. And you've covered a lot of ground here with actually becoming a SEAL, and I know you have limited time, so I do want to get into other stuff because you've done so much since then.
So
you started a website, SOFREP, which is, part of the SEAL community, where you're telling people all this, all the stuff that goes on in the SEALs, and just kind of reports on what's going on in military, what's going on in politics. You wrote your own book, The Red Circle. As you said, you wrote a book with Jack Murphy. What I want, you said earlier when we first started the interview that, these guys are kind of coming down on trying to bring down the profile that these guys have made. And I know that on shows that I've worked on, we've had on people like Dick Marcinko, who founded SEAL Team 6, and guys like you, guys, as you said, like Jack Murphy, and of course your friend Chris Kyle, who unfortunately passed away recently. So have you gotten any crap from the people top up in the military that, we don't really want you writing these books, we don't want you making such a high profile for the SEALs, or anything like that?
Well, I haven't gotten any direct input, but plenty of indirect. And let me just bring you up to speed. I'll finish the SEAL thing real quick and then bring you up to date where I'm at now. So, the SEAL thing is, you go through the first phase, which I described. Second phase is dive phase. Third phase is kind of land warfare, where you start shooting and blowing stuff up. And when you graduate that, you go on to another 3 months where you really start learning the foundations of what it's like to be a SEAL. And that people fail out of that too. Probably about 10% fail out for safety reasons. Then you get to a SEAL team and you do another 12 to year and a half workup cycle, deploy overseas, come back, and now you're a SEAL. Like, you're accepted as, you're not a rookie. So it's a very long process. My career, I spent on the West Coast at SEAL Team 3. I ended up getting into the sniper specialty pretty early on, went to Afghanistan, came back, got into instructor duty, decided as I was running the sniper program for the West Coast that I would just burn out. I've been going pretty hard for almost 14 years straight and decided to get out. And never would I thought that I would be trading my sniper rifle for a MacBook Pro, turning into a writer and running a media company online.
But it's become more commonplace. It's a lot of these SEALs get out and are becoming writers for websites like yours.
Yeah, I've got SOFREP.com. I started because I was working part-time at military.com, and to be completely honest, I was really disenchanted with the organization and that they didn't really, from my perspective, care. They didn't care too much about the military. They were just about making money, and they didn't treat their writers very well. And so I told Jack, I said, look, nobody's running a site on the internet focused about special operations that has any credibility. There's plenty of wannabes out there that run these sites, but they're not from the community. They don't get it. So I started SOFREP just over a year ago, and since then we've turned into the largest special operations site on the net, and it's worldwide. We have 180 countries a month.
And and you guys, for people who haven't seen the website, you do more than just write about this stuff. You kind of have roundtables with your guys in the SEALs talking about all this stuff that we're speaking on now.
Yeah, we have our own TV network that USAA, one of our biggest sponsors, got behind. We have our own podcast show, which is #1 in the government category on iTunes.
Nice.
We've done a lot in a year, and what we've done is kind of provided a home for these guys that do want to write, or they've already written a book and they still want to write about things that are happening in the world and the Middle East and North Africa, and these are experts talking about stuff that they know.
And when you use the word expert, it's not someone who went to college and studied this stuff. It's someone who was actually there in these areas that they're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. It's one thing, and there are plenty. I don't want to take away from the journalists. There's plenty of journalists, like my friend Jeremy Scahill, who wrote Blackwater. They've been over there and lived it and put their ass on the line, and they've been overseas for decade or more, and they understand. But there's also the other kind of self-proclaimed experts in the media or in academia, and they like to weigh in on the future of special operations intelligence community. And these guys couldn't find their way out of a fucking paper box. It just shocks me. And they're speaking to Congress, and they're on all the big media, Fox or CNN, talking about this and that. I'm looking at these guys like, man, like if I put you outside the wire in Baghdad, Iraq, you'd shit your pants. So our whole thing is authenticity, and that's what we're all about. It's like we're talking about stuff that we know about and have experienced firsthand, and it kind of freaks a lot of the big media guys and some of the journalists that haven't been overseas. It freaks them out a little bit because we're bringing the heat.
Yeah.
And for instance, I broke a story on Safra about this whole UBL shooter drama, and we broke the story on Monday, and it essentially said, look, the guy that Esquire interviewed was not the guy that shot bin Laden. He was.
Wait, really? I didn't even hear about this. The guy who quoted George Bush and all this stuff, and he talked about what pumped him up to, raid bin Laden and basically shoot bin Laden in the head. That was not the shooter?
This whole Esquire piece on the quote-unquote shooter, which was a terrible. I mean, the thing is, they chose that headline. The real
wasn't the headline "I shot bin Laden" or something?
The headline was "The man who shot bin Laden is screwed." Like cover of Esquire, and Phil Bronstein, who I'm going to call out because he wrote the piece, he goes into this dialogue of, this guy, here's the guy who shot bin Laden, and he's screwed. He got out of the military.
No health care, right?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. The guy, if Bronstein had done his homework, he would have figured out that the guy has plenty of benefits, even though he volunteered to get out at 16 years, 4 years short of a full retirement. It was his own decision. The shooter was encouraged. The shooter in his article was encouraged to stay in and finish out his 4 years because he would have got full medical for him and his family. He would have got a decent retirement benefit. And so Bronstein, to say that this guy's screwed and not even mention his military benefits that are available to him just shows the ignorance of his whole piece. Like he didn't even spend 5 minutes looking into what this guy was entitled to. So,
yeah.
But the bigger issue is this guy was embellishing his role in the UBL raid, and he was a SEAL that was there, but everyone in my community and what we're all about with the SEAL ethos is this is team. It's about the team, not the individual.
Sure.
And it's why when Obama asked him at the White House, hey, which one of you shot him, nobody said anything because they said, look, it was a team effort. And so
it's not about getting the glory for what happened. This is, they just want to hear about the SEAL. It doesn't have to be a spotlight on one guy. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and guys in the community were upset because this guy was embellishing and, in fact, was not the guy that put the 2 rounds into bin Laden's head that ended his life. It was the point man, which is still on active duty, hasn't come forward. The guy that Esquire interviewed was the guy that he was right there, but he shot a dead bin Laden's body after the point man had already ended his life. So
sure.
That's the point that we wanted to make on the piece that I wrote for SOFREP, which was, I think it was 2 weeks ago now.
I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah, it came out on a Monday, and the Blaze News Network picked it up, and then a couple of the other blogs picked it up. And then on Tuesday, I get a call from CNN, and they're like, hey, Bergen is doing a story on this bin Laden thing and the Esquire shooter. And I was like, hey, hey, gents, I did that story almost 24 hours ago. And all of a sudden CNN didn't want to talk to me.
Wow.
And the next thing you know, Bergen's on TV acting like he has an exclusive on the story. And if I didn't believe that Bergen talked to one of my sources, it would look an awful lot like plagiarism.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of backstabbing like that seems to go on in media, and everybody has to get the story first or act like they got the story first. I kind of want to move on to some other stuff, though, because, as I said, I know you have limited time, but I always feel like guys who do get to go to the military, do get to go to these places overseas, once they come back, they have a very different view of how they see America's role in the world, how we see where we are. And there's always these issues that come up with foreign policy as a general issue. The founders never saw us in all these places that we are now. And some would argue it's a different world. We have to be in all these places. We have to have all these military bases, even though it drains a lot of money, to be honest, from the taxpayer. But do you ever question, should we be still in Japan? Should we be in all these places all over the world? And are we more welcome there, or would they like to see us leave, quite frankly?
No, I mean, it's a good point you bring up. And I just want to say before we move on that Bergen's an asshole. And
okay.
I would love to smack him in the face next time I see him in New York, because he should have given us credit for the story. But
of course,
on the foreign policy issue, the thing is, and blame lies in the Bush and Obama administration, is if you look at, are we more welcome in the world today than we were 15 years ago as far as, the U.S. diplomacy abroad? I would say no. Like, people don't. I think we've lost our course in America
because we're being looked at more as people who intervene in foreign affairs, I feel like, than people who defend this country, which I mean, I can't speak for people in the military, but people that I talk to feel like they join the military to defend this country, not to be a part of other foreign relations.
Well, I mean, it's a fine line. I mean, you have to defend the homeland, whatever you want to call it, but there's a place for foreign diplomacy. The problem is when you don't have a clear foreign policy strategy, it shows, which we don't, in my opinion, right now. We're meddling in all these different affairs and not really thinking about the consequences, or are we learning from our past mistakes? And I'll point to Afghanistan and Syria. So here we are in 1980s supporting the Mujahideen and bin Laden directly, the U.S. putting Stinger missiles, guns, training, funding, in the Mujahideen's hands, who are waging a holy war against the Soviets in their occupation of Afghanistan. And then the same group that we're supporting comes back to, hijack 2 planes and fly them into the Twin Towers. And we're largely responsible for that. And fast forward to Syria, now we're supporting this covert weapons program, getting weapons into the Syrian rebels' hands. And al-Nusra, which is Al-Qaeda's front in Syria, I mean, we're like supporting them all over again. And it's just like, didn't we do this before and it didn't work out too well for us?
Sure.
And it goes to show you, and that's just one example. I could talk about North Africa and the Middle East until the cows come home, but it just, there's so many examples. And one of the reasons why Benghazi, Libya was so important as an event is it truly represented how screwed up our foreign policy is in the world.
Sure.
And that's why, I lost my best friend in Benghazi.
Yeah, I was going to say, people listening who aren't familiar with you, you have a special connection with that because your friend Glenn Doherty was one of the people who unfortunately was killed in that.
Yeah, and the thing is, why Benghazi happened and how the State Department is really, has run by very poor leadership. And as much as, I'll place some blame on Hillary Clinton, which definitely I'm still scratching my head on how she dodged any responsibility for that. It really comes, and we point this out in our book, Benghazi, the definitive report, is that the Undersecretary of Management, Patrick Kennedy, he's had a terrible track record on his, as far as his career and protecting these embassies overseas and what the State Department's doing with regards to diplomacy and security overseas. It really comes down to his role as Undersecretary of Management, which is one of the most powerful roles at the State Department. They're nicknamed Black Dragons. Mm-hmm. They call them M for short. But the thing is, it really represents what's all that is wrong with the way things are handled in the State Department and our foreign policy strategy. And really, no one's doing anything about it. No one's talking about what we do. Another example is we're supposedly at war with terror or have this declared war on terrorism, yet we're still supporting terrorist groups I mentioned earlier, in Syria, but also in Iran. We supported a group called MEK. You hear about these Iranian scientists getting blown up. Well, that's MEK, and Israel and America are backing that group now.
Sure. And that brings us to even a bigger question. I mean, I've been to Israel. I'm a supporter of Israel, but sometimes it seems like we are more backing up their interests than our own. And I think that when someone joins the U.S. military, they want to be there to defend where we're from, where America. And I don't think, as much as they're an ally of us, I don't think we should lose one military member for another country's, good.
Well, and that's the thing in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has become our generation's Vietnam. I mean, when you look at what will we have accomplished when we pull out of Afghanistan, we're getting publicly lambasted by Karzai and the media. The Taliban obviously are just waiting for us to pull out so they can step in. They're already talking to the Chinese and the Russians about negotiating this trans-Afghan pipeline. So we're going to pull out, and we're going to have no power in Afghanistan, no social power, and the Russians and Chinese are going to step in and reap all the benefits of what little natural resources Afghanistan represents. But it is a gateway that connects the Middle East to Asia, and when you talk about the oil pipeline and stuff like that, it just goes to show you, what are we doing? And we really need strong leadership to go, you know what? This is what America stands for, and this is what this is our plan in the world to kind of promote the American way of life and freedom.
But does that mean forcing the American way of life onto other countries? Is that in our best interest?
You can't do that, but you can affect cultural change over time. It's
sure.
Kind of how the internet really spurred the Arab Spring. It's because of information. People are all of a sudden going, wait a minute, this is happening in the rest of the world, in Europe and America. And,
exactly. With the internet, you can't really fool the people anymore as to what's going on in foreign affairs. Everything could be researched, and there are people, with camera phones everywhere in the world putting up video.
Yeah, and so you have to respect their traditions, their cultures, and understand that you can't wipe it out and all of a sudden make it all American apple pie. It takes time, but I think every person on the planet inherently wants freedom. They want to be free to choose and do what they want, and the internet has provided a lot of that. But back to my point is, if you ask just ask anybody in New York City what America's ultimate objective in Afghanistan is, and you'll get a ton of different answers.
I feel like I couldn't really tell you, and I'm a guy who tries to stay on top of all this.
I watched one of my soft rep readers forwarded me a link to a talk that retired General Stanley McChrystal gave to Stanford, and it was like hearing myself, it felt so gratifying to hear McChrystal talk about Afghanistan and the lack of the strategy that still exists. And, I'm like, wow, at least finally somebody is like saying it in a very powerful position.
Sure. And what's I think McChrystal is one of those guys who is very separate from these other guys at the top because he lives a very military lifestyle. He's a guy who goes out and runs every day and has gone through all this. And he's not one of these guys at the top who's just a decision maker who doesn't know what it's like to be on the front lines.
Yeah, I mean, he's very well respected. And so we've got major issues in the United States, and we've got enough problems at home without, having 200 and whatever it is, 60 plus State Department facilities all over the world, and really nobody knowing what the hell is going on with how we're promoting our diplomacy, and it's a big problem, and it's wasting a lot of money, and unfortunately wasting a lot of lives in the process.
And looking forward, there's two major threats on the table to America, and it's just a question of how do we handle them. I mean, you have Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who's threatening to nuke everybody, basically, if they have the capability, and same with Iran with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad over there. The last thing I want to see is to see our country invade, our military invade another country and wind up with another Afghanistan or Iraq, where we're there for another 10 years. But you also can't ignore threats like those. I think a lot of people talk about these jokingly, especially with Kim Jong-un, because they're like, he's this young kid. He's, bringing Dennis Rodman over there, and people look at him as a joke. But at the same time, if that country gets the capability to do any damage, it's going to be a huge problem. How do we handle either of those?
I mean, personally, I think Iran is way more of a threat than North Korea. I mean, you can't at some point. I mean, that rhetoric coming out of North Korea it's the same stuff. It's almost he's parroting his father's narrative. However, I mean, they do have the nuclear capability. I think he could create a mess that we'd have to clean up, and it would be a tragedy. But North Korea would be very easily defeated, and we wouldn't be going at it alone if that was the case. I think the rest of the world would police up that mess. But looking at Iran, I mean, the problem with Iran is you have a very extremist religious viewpoint that essentially controls the country. I mean, you have the president, but the real power in Iran is the religious leadership. And, when you have these mullahs that essentially they believe that God wants to wipe America off the map, that's a fucking problem that you need to take seriously, because and then you have a whole bunch of religious fanatics that are willing to smuggle, say a pocket nuke, or probably more realistic scenario would be a biological weapon into the U.S. Very easy to do.
It's especially easy to do with, I was going to say, our borders are a complete mess right now.
Yeah. When you have, and let me touch on the border thing. I spoke to the president of the Border Patrol Union. I was involved when I first got out of the military, in a real estate project that was potentially going to go right up near the southern border of California and Mexico. I talked to the Border Patrol Union president, and he said, you know what? Our agents, they don't even give pursuit. We're worried. He's like, I'm worried. The way the Border Patrol runs is they can't wait to write somebody up on a report for damaging a vehicle because they gave pursuit to some cartel or some group coming across the border that puts up any resistance. So if they encounter any resistance whatsoever, the Border Patrol, they just turn the other way and drive away.
And the shame is that the border issue is looked at just as this simple issue of people trying to come to America for a better life, but there's a way bigger national security issue attached to that.
Yeah, I mean, and we are good at some things. We've got the shipping containers that are coming into the country on the boats. They've got some very good methods in place I won't get into, but for detecting, chem, bio, nuclear material. The problem is you get, a terrorist cell in the U.S. sponsored by Iran, and they've always been known as a big sponsor of terrorism, regardless of your, sect of Islam. You get a cell in the U.S. of smart guys, and you have very intelligent people who are devout extremists, and you develop some type of dirty weapon. And I mean, what's it take to dump some type of cocktail into Niagara Falls and contaminate all of, the water that flows to? You're talking New York City's water supply.
Yeah.
It's just, and that's why Iran, that situation cannot be taken lightly. I think they're a ways away from a nuclear capability, but if they do get one, and they do get a nuclear weapon, getting a pocket nuke into someone's hands, and what do they care? I mean, just think about the consequences of a major chem, bio, or nuclear pocket nuke type of situation on American soil. It's freaking a disaster for us, our economy. Look at how we handled Katrina. Katrina was a mess.
Yeah.
Now let's look at a major city in the U.S. having a nuclear explosion. Good luck dealing with that situation.
Of course. You know what? I didn't really get a chance to touch on this, but I at least wanted to talk about this a little bit. Not only, did what happened with your friend Glenn Doherty and Benghazi happen, but also you were a great friend of Chris Kyle, who's probably the most famous Navy SEAL sniper of this age, who unfortunately, and tragically was killed at a shooting range. And the one thing that was absolutely crazy after it happened was when Ron Paul, who I've always been a supporter of, put out that what I would call really ignorant tweet of live by the sword, die by the sword, and you shouldn't be taking a guy with PTSD to a shooting range. I mean, I was devastated that he would write something like that. And who even knows if he wrote it or a staffer wrote it. One thing that really does piss me off is when people like yourself and people who actually volunteer for the military are blamed for the bad foreign policy decisions that you guys have nothing to do with. And also in his case, he was back home. He wasn't even at war when that happened.
Yeah, I mean, Ron Paul wasn't the only politician to put his foot in his mouth there. And my problem with that is, just like you said, it's like these guys, Chris volunteered to go into the service, was a SEAL, did his job and did what he was ordered to do and did it very well. And to take a cheap shot like that, I mean, Chris's body isn't even in the ground yet, and his family and friends are grieving. It was the same reason Chris Kyle socked Jesse Ventura in the mouth at that bar in Coronado, McPee's, because Jesse was running his suck while there was a wake going on for Mike Mansour's family. So it's like inappropriate, right? Like, it's just completely inappropriate. And you can't, and I've seen the extreme liberal had a very similar response to the situation. Like, oh, well, he deserved to die because he killed all these people. It's like, wait a minute here. How many people has Obama killed with the drone program? I mean, which
is a more cowardly thing at the end of the day. Chris Kyle had to look at these people in the face, and I mean, I even heard him recall, having to shoot women, and possibly even children on Opie and Anthony because they were going to kill U.S. troops. And when you're in that position, it's a very hard position to be in, I could imagine. Do you think that it was that looking back, this maybe is not the way we should handle something like PTSD by bringing these guys to a shooting range, because incidents like these, unfortunately, can happen, as we saw?
The thing is, what I think happened, Chris Kyle, is you got to understand the pressure and the demand that guys like Chris and myself and Chris way more so than me. But people, they feel like, oh, you need to help my son, you need to do this, you need to go to this school. And we get requests like that all the time, and it's not a case, we want to help. And in Chris's case, the mother of this young man was, I believe, a school teacher at a school that Chris's kids went to. And so she had kind of access and essentially said, look, I know you care about these veterans issues. Will you help my son? What she failed to mention was her son had serious mental issues, was hospitalized in a mental institution, had threatened gun violence to his family and his girlfriend before.
And had he have known this probably could have been prevented.
Yeah, I mean, Chris probably would have never taken that on had he known that. But the issue of taking vets out hunting or to the range, it's a familiar environment, and
sure.
It's a comfortable environment. You got to realize where these guys come from and what their backgrounds are. It's a very comfortable environment to go. It would be like, an NBA basketball player taking some troubled high school kid to the basketball court.
But the unfortunate thing is how big PTSD is these days. And I know you have to get going, but I mean, you hear so many incidents of just crazy things that happen to these vets with PTSD. And I don't think that, like, for example, I mean, I recently read a book about Tim McVeigh. Another thing was I actually happened to be watching the Pantera Behind the Music last night, which, when Dimebag Darrell was shot on stage, it shot and killed by a former Marine. I don't think these guys are born monsters and killers. I think PTSD drives people, and some of the medications they're on, which is a whole nother issue, drives them to do these monstrous acts. So sometimes putting a gun in the hands of these guys with PTSD, I could see how it might not be the best thing to do.
The big issue is that veterans, we've put probably the heaviest toll since World War II on our veterans over the past decade in Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, all over the Middle East. And they aren't getting the help. They're being lost in transition. And the VA has some good programs, but the VA is a bureaucracy. Shinseki, who's in charge of it, has done a terrible job at wasting money and not getting results. And these veterans are being left behind. And that's an issue that me and a few others, in the media have taken it upon ourselves. And Chris Kyle and I talked about it, like, what can we do to help? And because it's an issue close to our heart, and we know how it is because we've transitioned and known how difficult it is to work with the VA when you have the patience to do it. And a lot of these troubled individuals, they're just being left out, and then they're getting into trouble. And then there's, the American people, we all, Ron Paul included, we all have an ownership stake in the decisions that the American government makes, and sending these troops over, and in some cases them being in terrible situations and witnessing terrible situations, and then now we're not going to support that. Like, we all have an ownership of that. I don't care if you're a Republican or liberal or Democrat. If you live in America and you're an American citizen and have a U.S. passport, you don't get to sit there and put your head in the sand and point fingers at people. We all have an ownership stake in this, and it's a big problem, and we need to help these veterans as they transition.
Definitely. And that's a great way to sum things up. I'm really glad you could join us. Next time we really have to do in studio, and we will do a part 2 sometime when you're back in New York. Before I let you go, what's other than softRip.com, what stuff do you want the audience to check out, and what are you up to for the future?
Well, we're building out our TV channel on SoftRip. I'm going to Poland to film a documentary about the Polish Grom, a unit Chris Kyle was actually pretty close to. And in my next book, called Among Heroes, will be coming out early next year, which features a lot of guys like Chris Kyle who are no longer here, and I'm telling their stories. So I'm excited about that book as well.
Awesome. Thanks again, Brandon.
Yeah, you got it, Ian.
Well, there you have it. Inaugural broadcast of the Ian Scotto podcast. Next week, I already have planned that, if all goes accordingly, we're going to have my friend Intrinsic, Will Glass, a.k.a. Intrinsic, on, who's a rapper. He was in the band Fall Guy from Arizona. But I don't even want to talk so much about that. He recently became a raw food vegan, has gotten very into yoga. And he's a guy who's always, he's on my Facebook, always posting interesting stuff. And I was like, I kind of have to have a discussion with this guy about some of the stuff that we've discussed over the years, but give it to a broader audience. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Stay tuned. There's going to be a lot more to come in the future. And check out the Facebook if you haven't already. Facebook.com/Ian Scotto Podcast. On Twitter @Scotto Podcast. And on Instagram @Ian Scotto Podcast. Thanks again for joining us.